We're going to start the afternoon session now. In this session, we have Gregory Porter and Andrew Haines from the MFA, Chris Brooks and Allison Langley from the Art Institute of Chicago, Sacha Marie Levay from Montreal, and Allison Jackson from Harvard. And the session's going to be moderated by Tracy Gill, who I'll introduce right now. Tracy Gill is co-founder of Gill and Lagodich Fine Period Frames, New York. It's established in 1991, which are preeminent American framers for museums. She is a frame scholar and consultant to museums and noteworthy private collections. A curator of 4 period frame exhibitions, she authored the accompanying catalogs 100 Years on the Edge, The Frame in America, 1820 to 1920, Frames of Reference from Object to Subject, The American Frame from Origin to Originality, and Beaux-Arts and Crafts, Masterpieces of American Frame Design, 1890 to 1920. Her book publications include Forget-Me-Nots, A Victorian Book of Love, and she is a chapter author of American Period Frame Connoisseurship in the 21st Century in American Art Collecting and Connoisseurship. In 2025, Gill will be guest curator of an exhibition of important American frames from the collection of the Museum of the American Arts and Crafts Movement. The Gill and Lagodich Antique Frame Collection spans over 400 years and numbers over 2,000 frames, European and American. And I'm going to put Tracy's bio in the chat as well because her website is in there if you'd like to check it out. Please welcome Tracy.
Thank you, Julia. I'm honored to participate in this most important international gathering of frame scholars and quickly to respond to Lynn and what you've all been talking about as a need for repository of frame data. On our website, Frame Gallery website that Julia just mentioned, we're making a serious effort to organize our reframings by museum and also by cross-referenced by artist. It's an ongoing and very incomplete effort, but we think it's so important to share information, see how other museums and curators are choosing to reframe, and to make this information available to the public. Now I'm pleased to introduce the next 4 speakers. Having worked with a number of you on reframing projects at your various museums, it's marvelous to see more in-depth focus on single paintings, as well as Sacha and Allison's study of frames at a single institution. Here in America, there's much to share of frame study in our museums, and as Lisa mentioned earlier, in private collections. Elise described in her previous session on Musée d'Orsay the increase of low-cost production in late 19th century France. And it's fascinating to note that in America, the late 19th century and into the 20th century was actually a period of remarkable creativity in frame making and a return to hand craftsmanship by artist frame makers. So I was fascinated to learn that one of our most innovative frame makers, Charles Prendergast, my personal favorite, was hired by the Museum of Fine Arts Boston for frame restoration, which is the subject of our next presentation by Gregory Porter and Andrew Haines, The Conservation Treatment of the Frame on a 15th Century Venetian Altarpiece by Bartolomeo Vivarini. Thank you, Greg and Andy.
All right, so my name is Greg Porter. I'm the frame conservator at the MFA, and this is my colleague here sitting next to me, Andrew Haines. And today we're going to talk about the altarpiece we have here at the museum, the Bartolomeo Vivarini's 1485 altarpiece titled The Virgin and Dead Christ with the Ascension and Saints. It consists, as you can see here, of a central polychrome sculpture that is surrounded by 9 panel paintings, and it's all enclosed in a carved, ornate, gilded frame. Though we don't know exactly how much was disassembled when it was removed from its original location, which is in current-day Croatia, It was removed in 1876 to go basically back to Venice, where it was created, to an auction. It is believed to be an intact work with the exception of some frame elements which had been broken off or lost or damaged over the years. It came into the museum's collection in 1901, and all of the various elements, the frame, the sculpture, the paintings, they were all treated to different degrees over the century. So because of all of that, all of the elements never really spoke to each other particularly, making it not really read as a unified work of art. We have an image here from 1905 from the old Copley Square galleries. This is the oldest image we can find of it. You can see it right here. And you can see that already this is right after the first campaign of, we'll say restoration on the frame happened. You can see the frame looks quite bright, and you can see the paintings look quite dark. So already everything is already sort of out of sync. Here is an image from 6 years later. This is most likely when the altarpiece was moved to what is now the current MFA on Huntington Ave. And still, the frame looks very, very bright. The paintings are still somewhat dark. You can actually see there's splits in the panels. There's losses. You can actually see at the bottom of a lot of these, there's a lot of little pieces that are lost. So everything was already sort of not really being treated at the same time, not making it look like a unified object. So when it arrived here, we don't really have any records of how it arrived. We know it was disassembled to some degree, and we also do know that it had an engaged frame. We had done some research, and you can actually see all the nail holes. So we know that the elements were actually fastened to the face of the panels. So the frame was basically in need of some work before it could be displayed. So the museum in 1905 hired Charles Prendergast, a local frame maker, an artist, a woodworker, to basically restore the frame. You could say. We actually also are lucky enough to have a really great painting here of Charles Prendergast by Virginia Keep Clark. And he's gilding what is probably one of his actual, his own screens. You can see there's like a little deer right here. But Prendergast made a lot of frames for local artists. His brother, Maurice, he worked with the people at the Carrigrohane frame makers. So, Thulin and Herman Dudley Murphy. And he also made quite a few frames for John Singer Sargent. This painting right here is in our collection. And let me just get this out of the way. There we go. It's a portrait of General Charles Payne from 1904, and this is the frame that Prendergast had made for Sargent to put on the painting, and it's actually signed on the back of the frame, and it's dated. And I'll note, if you can hear banging in the background, they are assembling a tent outside our window right now. So Charles Prendergast was basically hired to do some work by the museum on the altarpiece. What did he do on the frame? Well, we know that he regilded the entire surface of the frame, but beyond that, we actually know what was done to it more sort of structurally or to replace elements, because we actually have a handwritten receipt or like a statement of what he had done to the altarpiece, which is amazing. Not only is it great to have documentation of what he had done to help us understand how to proceed in our restoration or our conservation, obviously, of the altarpiece. It's actually the oldest handwritten document that we have here at the museum of any treatment that was done on any of our objects, which is really great to have it in our archives. So you can see here, this is addressed to the director at the time, Edward Robinson, just basically explaining that he had replaced 5 spires counting from left to right, the center hood, base of top, base of bottom, and the returns on both sides. So it's pretty vague. Me and Andy always joke it sounds like a haiku or a poem. But to better understand what he had done, we had a few things that we wanted to do. First of all, we did know that the elements that he talks about adding turned the engaged frame, you can see some images of the back of the frame here, into a more conventional frame where the paintings are going to be able to be inserted in through the back and no longer have to have all the gilded carved elements nailed to the panels. So you can see here, these pieces were added. These photos here are of myself. You can't actually see Andy is here as well as painting conservator Judy Dion right here. We're doing tracings of the backside of these original elements to figure out where the old nail holes are so we could kind of help it correspond where they went on the panels. But so we know he added these elements to turn it into a more conventional frame. But to better understand other things that he had done sort of more structurally, like pieces he replaced, we x-rayed the entire frame so that it could help show what was under the campaign of gilding that he had added. So this is great information. Some of this you can actually see from the back of the frame, but some of it is completely covered by his new structure, and then some of it is covered by his new campaign of gilding. So it's really easy to see here. These spires are replaced. You can see all of the posts that he sort of added to structurally keep them from, make them more stable. You can definitely see these areas here where he probably bulked up either bug damage or loss with gesso or with plaster so that he could do that underneath the new layer of gilding that he added. And you can also see on a lot of the replaced elements, the wood is very clearly like New England 20th century milled pine. So this really helped us understand what we were looking at when it came time to start thinking about doing conservation work. So when it came down from the gallery in 2018, the surface of the frame was extremely dark. You can see here's a couple of close-ups. There was a variety of areas with loss. You can see a lot of those throughout. Old damage that was probably repaired while it was installed in the gallery. You can see there's the remnants of old glue. There's holes in it where somebody maybe used nails or screws at one point. There's bronze paint. And you can also see too, when he had sort of re-gessoed the surface to regild it, he didn't go back in and recut any of these pierced carved elements right here. So the detail starts to get a little bit mushy, and actually in a lot of areas, it's fully filled. So you can no longer see through those areas. So it was very unstable. The first thing we actually had to do was stabilize the surface. It was flaking wildly, and it actually had been flaking in the gallery. We occasionally had to go reattach some pieces while it was installed. And we had the question, did he just put a new campaign of water gilding over a failing old surface, or did he remove the old surface completely and then just go from basically sort of from scratch? So to figure that out, we took, I believe it was 22 samples throughout the frame, and then we looked at the cross sections to try to determine what was happening below the surface. And with the exception of actually this one example right here, all of them showed that he had fully removed all of the old surface and just went right down to the wood. This exception right here, which comes from inside the sort of like carved detail, he didn't fully remove the original surface. So you can see right here is a very, very fine layer of gold that starts to go away. And there's a little bit of probably dirt or toner, but basically new layer right here of gesso, bowl, gold, and then you can actually see it better here, a really darkened toner and then dirt. So we basically knew that he had sort of stripped it down and then he re-water gilded the entire surface. So here's an image of me at some point sitting in the frame, which was flat on our benches downstairs for quite a long time. The first thing we had to do is we had to seep a consolidant under the surface of where all the losses were. and basically sort of like tack it back down with a heating iron and some mylar to stabilize the whole surface. So we could start thinking about the very dark toner that was on the surface. When you look at the old images that we have from the early 1900s, right after he had treated it, it doesn't appear that he put a dark toner on the frame. So at some point, a toner had been applied, most likely to make it match the paintings, which had not been treated, so that everything was actually attempting to be a little bit more the same tone, even though things weren't being treated at the same time. So in addressing the toner, we had realized that it was an oil-based toner that was slightly pigmented but had darkened a lot over time that was applied to the surface. So in doing cleaning tests, we had come up with a solution that actually removed it pretty easily, being that it was oil-based and it was on a water-gilded surface. So we could get down to what you see here or here is Prendergast's campaign of water gilding. You can also see applied in some of the cutout areas of detail here, somebody had applied a red wash, and that was actually done after the toner was applied to the surface of the frame. So this is actually on top. So this is even either possibly newer or done after they put the entire toner over the surface, which would make, I guess, some sense. And here's an image of one of the top elements, half cleaned and half dirty. You can see there's a fair amount of loss in here. So here is after the bottom had been cleaned and the top hadn't. But one of the things we uncovered, which is really interesting, is as we started to get into the area in here on both sides, which coincidentally was in sort of the best condition. It wasn't really failing. There wasn't a lot of losses there. That area, we didn't take a sample from just in here. We took them from 22 other places, but for whatever reason, we missed just these two areas. And Prendergast had actually covered this area, basically from right about here to here, with a new campaign of oil gilding, thus covering up this surface. And we think that he probably did it because that area is slightly obscured by the sculpture when it's installed. And it probably was in good enough condition that he thought, I'll save this, probably saving himself some time to not have to remove that surface. And he covered it with a new layer of oil gilded gold to tonally match all of his new water gilded areas. So when we started removing the toner in here, we uncovered a nice old layer of water gilding with this beautiful blue, which is a blue tempera paint. So we're really excited. We thought this could be at least an older surface. So as the project went on and we started to work on all the other elements, we did scientific research. One of my colleagues here, Aaron Mysak, did analysis of the pigment that is in this right here in these sections. And we have many reports that we're not going to get into. We don't have time. We're going to try to keep going through. But basically, it was determined that the blue that is in those elements right there perfectly matches not only pigments, but all the imperfections and the binder and everything perfectly matched the blue that is in some of the paintings, as well as the background of the sculpture. So we know that that blue was applied at the same time as the paintings, which is great information. We also have just a little piece of interesting information here, which is on the backside of all the pierced carved elements at the top. We found traces of red paper, as well as pieces of paper that were probably glued like here to stabilize breaks. But you can see, because all these areas right here from the front, because he didn't recut them, and because there's actually a structural piece back here now, you can't see the red paper even if it was back there. And so we wanted to do analysis. We didn't have any plans to replace it, but we did do analysis to just see what it consisted of. And through doing research, we figured out that it was gypsum and it was vermilion, and they couldn't quite date it. But at one point, before Prendergast had treated it, somebody had applied red paper to the pierced carved elements, which is really interesting. So now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Andy, as we like to joke, this is the intermission part. This is the pandemic, and this is where the project sort of switches. There's a delay, and now Andy will take over.
It seemed like, hi, everybody, and thank you, Greg. There was a pandemic interlude. It was about 2 years when the frame was half cleaned. Greg and I traded places. I took advantage of the lockdowns to leave the museum and see what else the world maybe had to offer for me. And Greg was fortunate enough to get my job, or I was fortunate to know that Greg got my job. So this has been a fabulous project. It was something that I was clanging the bell to get the attention of the right curator and to find funding for the Altarpiece, because it was an object that we had in the collection that was pretty unique, at least in North America, to have a complete Vivarini Altarpiece. And the frame was flaking wildly. Greg was kind when he said anytime we dusted the gallery, it was always coming back on another piece of the Vivarini. It was too important of an object to be suffering that badly on view. But I was forgive me. I took over where Greg left off with the cleaning, finished the cleaning, and then the next subject was what to do to compensate all those areas of loss. It was a daunting thing to think that I would use something like a PVA like Pfluger or Motorstück. And I discussed it with everyone and wanted to use a material that I'm quite familiar with and very comfortable with, which is this two-part epoxy putty Quickwood. I'm showing two examples here. Quickwood on the right sets up in about a half an hour, where the Mohawk sets up in about 15 minutes. And it's a wonderful thing that does not involve water in any way. So when using it with water-gelt surfaces, you can move it around and level your fill before it sets and get things and use edge tools, and it sands very nicely as well. So that was a speedier way for to make the fills. We isolated the area with a layer of liquid hide glue before any Quickwood was applied. Here you can see the fills prepared for gilding. My plan always was to use an alternative gilding method, just basically gilding directly over acrylic paint. I would paint the fills in an appropriate, approximating the bowl color, and then apply gold leaf. Once the acrylic paint set up overnight, you could then apply gold leaf directly to it with a gilding liquor of water and alcohol, and it would burnish, never be quite as bright as the original gilding, but also be pretty flawless. But it was pretty quickly after doing a few of those fills. Here I can see in this, there's the large fills down at the bottom prepared for gilding. But pretty quickly we found that the gold, even though we had a very good color match, the gold was just a little too strong. And then there was just a lot of work getting that back to the surface you wanted it. And I was making out better with mica powder pigments and golden paint, just kind of painting up to the surface of the frame. So here are two images of the same section of the frame that's been basically painted with acrylics. So 2019, as I said, this was a long-going project. In 2019, before I left the MFA, I had the good fortune of having a courier trip to Venice to bring back a painting for the MFA, and I was there at the same time as our curator, Frederick Hilchman. Frederick was there for Save Venice reasons, and together we spent a full day looking at Vivarini's throughout the city, Vivarini and his contemporaries, other contemporaneous altarpieces throughout the city. And looking online before that trip, I was thinking, once I got to San Zaccaria and got behind the rope, all my blue questions would have been answered immediately. I was a little disappointed when I got up close to some of these, because you could see their altarpieces, not unlike our own, had been the subject to many people's ideas over many years. And it wasn't clear. Most of the blue I could see, at least at eye level, was all restoration blues. Perhaps with a lift and more lights and more time, one would find original blue someplace else on one of these three altarpieces. So back in Boston, here we see the column that Greg was talking about, where he discovered the the original gilding just under a layer of gold leaf. And to the right is my in gilt passages and the blue paint that we were applying. So what we learned from Aaron's report was that the blue was done in 2 stages. The blue was actually lead, or maybe 3 stages, was a wash of indigo over lead white with azurite on top of that to come up with a pretty convincing blue color. For that purposes, I again turned to acrylic paint and did using 3 different blues to not be confused with either indigo or azurite, let alone my acrylic medium. But I did a mixture of cobalt and Prussian blue, I believe, over top of a Payne's gray base to simulate that. And once it got a little bit of a yellow toning layer, I think I got a pretty convincing odd greenish blue. The question still was where to put the blue, where in particular the horizontal blues were going to go. So based on all the photography and things that Frederick and I saw in Venice, I had the opportunity to start installing blue in different passages of the frame once it was restored to gold. The blue was super important, and I can't stress how important it was when we put panels in with just the old gold frame. The frame became kind of oppressively bland, even though it has all that wonderful carving throughout it. And the blue, picking out the blue really threaded the painting, the images of the saints and the background of the sculpture together in a really elegant way. But there was still the question of blues on the horizontal bits. After seeing this, we all agreed that probably, since we didn't know, less was going to certainly be more in this situation. And so here you can see, I don't know if that's in the way of everybody, but here you can see more or less blue. It's the same bay of the frame. I was able to remove the blue from the gilt portions up in the top there very easily. And we went with a lesser scheme. The other thing that was exciting about this project was the paintings lab and the frame and furniture lab work together all the time on projects, basically frame projects. But we were able to work somewhat uniquely with the folks in the objects lab. And you would think objects and frames have a lot in common, and we do, but we don't often get to work together. So Monica Berry, another independent contract conservator, was given the job of working on the central sculpture. The sculpture is one of the most wonderful parts of our altarpiece. It had this blue background that looked kind of an odd black green because it had so much grime and later campaigns of varnish on top. And it also had these giant losses in the halo, and the halo would be central to the composition of the altarpiece once it's finished. So the question was what to do about these losses in the halo. Here you see it's covered under mylar because I'm making traces of the losses, but there's 3 major losses, and then there was one large fill to the right of the split in the center that that needed to be dealt with. So for that, I went with a suggestion with an idea that Greg came up with for a brightly burnished, to make a veneer for a brightly burnished frame where he painted acrylic paint directly onto a piece of glass. And then after, with enough layers of that, he pulled it off and then applied gold leaf directly to it and got a very slick finish almost instantly. Instead, what I planned to do was to make casts of the existing punch work on the frame, and with my mylar stencils, make little veneers that we could put over top of the areas of loss, and you wouldn't have to fill all that insect damage and wood with a bunch of goop in some way or other. So we started out by, I painted directly onto the silicone molds in a manner that suggested the bowl and gesso on the frame. It took about 15 to 20 coats. I was just painting white paint on the back of these until I had something that was thick enough and flexible enough that I could mount on the Japanese paper, and then using the stencils, I cut out little squares, and here you can see them in the process of being installed before they're toned. And then they were toned. So going back to this image, a super important thing that and revelatory is, I would say, is when the sculpture actually was cleaned and some of the painting was adjusted on the face itself. Here you'll see my fills in the back, the fill for the big split, and where the old that old attempt at filling the halo, we didn't actually remove that in any way, and I just kind of painted some noise on top of that to suggest the punch work in the frame. But back to the face and the sculpture, Monica did an amazing job on bringing the sculpture up to looking something like maybe it once did. And once you saw the painted face of the sculpture, it became quite obvious that the hand of the sculpture painter was most likely exactly the same hand as the painter himself for the panels, and that the kind of the magical thing that we hadn't seen in years, where the standing saints and the figure in the sculpture were the same. In the past, when the gold painted panels were treated, they spray coated both paintings and the gilding, which always gave the gold of the panels a green tinge that did not match Mr. Prendergast's choice of gold in the frame or the gold that we saw in the sculpture. But today, should you come to the MFA and see the gallery hanging in the see the altarpiece hanging in the gallery, I think the golds all talk to each other in a way that no one has seen in a very long time, and it was very satisfying to be invited back to work on this project, a project that I had been championing for a very long time. Thank you, Greg, the folks at the MFA, and the folks at the AGO for giving us this opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Greg and Andy. That was really interesting. Very familiar with Charles Prendergast's gilding. My partner, Simeon Lagodish, and I did a survey of all the Prendergast frames at the Terra Foundation of American Art and the Art Institute of Chicago. And I can tell you these condition issues, the delamination, the thick gilding are very common to Charles Prendergast, and I doubt he even knew how to recut. So it's really interesting because it actually has that kind of folky, whimsical quality of his frames. So this I guess there'll be questions for you in the chat later, which brings us to our next two speakers. And having worked with the Art Institute of Chicago on dozens of reframing projects since the 1990s, it's marvelous to share the research and process of major paintings such as the Grande Jatte. Also, the Art Institute of Chicago, like Boston, is fortunate to have an in-house framing department, Chicago in particular. And as Lynn Roberts noted yesterday, the 1986 publication, Art of the Edge, A History of European Picture Frames, is an early example of the Art Institute's dedication to the frame. And now Chris Brooks and Allison Langley, reframing Georges Seurat, A Sunday on the Grande Jatte, 1884, a process of research, revision, and refinement. Thank you, Allison and Chris.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to speak today. And I'll just go ahead and jump in. In 2021, the Art Institute of Chicago undertook the reframing of Georges Seurat's A Sunday at La Grande Jatte. Our monumental painting is one of the most important works in our collection. The large canvas depicts people from different social classes strolling and relaxing in a park just west of Paris on the Isle of La Grande Jatte on the River Seine. Seurat painted La Grande Jatte in three distinct stages. In the first stage, between May 1884 and March 1885, Seurat painted the entire canvas in an impressionist style with small linear brushstrokes. After setting it aside for the summer, he returned to the canvas in October of 1885 and reworked the entire surface during the next 9 months to add a series of brightly colored contrasting dots. Seurat's emerging painting technique known as pointillism was inspired by the color theories of Michel-Eugène Chevreul. In his publication, Chevreul discussed the effect of simultaneous contrast on the retina of the eye. The theory was that placing pure contrasting colors, for example, blue next to orange, would lead to an optical blending of the colors from a distance while simultaneously making each color appear more brilliant. Seurat's pointillism technique created a vibrant, almost vibrating effect on the painting surface and on the outer viewer. As he added colored dots to the painting, he also expanded the contours of many of the forms. Looking closely at the painting, you can see the haloing effects from the addition of colored dots around the edges of the figures and the landscape. Seurat both widened the forms and explored juxtapositions of contrasting color. He began experimenting with the transitional roles of his painting and his frame choices. The Grande Jatte was first exhibited at the 8th and last Impressionist exhibition in May 1886, and again in August 1886 at the second Salon of the Society of Independent Artists. We have no photos of the exhibition, but we have a glimpse of what the painting looked like in the background of the large-scale painting, The Models, painted in 1886 and now in the collection of the Barnes Foundation. In this image, we see the reworked painting leaning against the wall in Seurat's studio, what we believe to be an early white frame. The painting did not remain in that frame long. Seurat returned to the canvas one more time in 1889. In this third stage, he expanded the surface area of the painting by turning the tacking edges to the surface plane. Then he painted a border of bright blue, red, and orange dots around the perimeter of the painting. The Grande Jatte was discovered unframed in Seurat's studio when he died in 1891, leading to a continued debate about how to frame the work. Since entering the collection at the Art Institute in 1926, at least 7 different frames have graced the painting. While the frames were not well documented, we can deduce a basic timeline of framing from historic photos. Around 1891, at the time of Seurat's death, French painter and writer Lucie Couturier acquired the Grande Jatte. In the only known photo of the painting from this time, we see it mounted on the wall in the background. In 1926, the Chicago Art Institute collector Frederick Clay Bartlett purchased the Grande Jatte through a private sale. Mr. Bartlett made many of the presentation decisions for the works in his collection, and he designed the frames himself, even after they were donated to the Art Institute. The frame visible in this 1931 photo is the earliest known image of the painting in our galleries. It appears to be a narrow toy shape painted white. The painting next appears in a gilded fillet frame in 1933, also designed by Mr. Bartlett. The Grande Jatte was part of a presentation from American collections presented at the Chicago World's Fair. In this photo from 1935 with the actor Charles Lawton posing in front of the painting, we can see the flat surface of the gilded frame and also the reflection of the glazing. Glazing was noted in the 1886 exhibition of the painting, and the Grande Jatte has remained behind glass since it entered our collection in 1926. In 1945, we took a different approach. This frame was based on our best estimation of the frame depicted in the 1886 painting, The Models. The torus outer edge, shallow cushion, and torus side edge. A decision indicating an interest in Seurat's original framing choices. It was featured prominently in the 1958 Seurat retrospective organized by the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was also like very popular for posing. Here's a picture with a French actor and mime, Marcel Marceau. In 1958, so the Seurat retrospective also traveled to the Museum of Modern Art. Le Grande Jatte was installed on a plinth, likely due to the weight and scale of the frame and glazing. On April 15th, 1958, a fire at MoMA forced the evacuation of Le Grande Jatte to the Whitney Museum. Fortunately, the two museums were joined at the time, giving the painting a safe place to land. And legend has it that Nelson Rockefeller and evacuated employees rushed back inside to save Le Grande Jatte and many other prominent works from the fire and water damage. After this unfortunate incident, the Art Institute's board of trustees decided the painting would no longer travel for loans. By 1959, the interest in the artist frame choices had waned. A Louis XVI neoclassical reproduction frame was produced in New York by the APF company, now APF Munn. This frame remained on Le Grande Jatte for more than 20 years. The painting remained popular for visitors, photo shoots, and here again, you see the reflection of the glazing. In the 1980s, the museum's curators renewed efforts to improve the historical accuracy of the frames in our collection. A new version of the white frame inspired by the 1886 painting The Models was produced. And this time the frame was built by Art Institute frame staff. The new frame was sturdy enough to bear the weight of the heavy sheet of glass, but this version of the white Taurus frame was massive and lacked the refinement of 19th century frames. You can see the scale of the frame in the photo with the composer Stephen Sondheim in 1983. And this is the same year his musical based on characters in a painting, Sunday in the Park with George was premiered. And here's a frame in a famous scene from the 1986 movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, preserving the painting in this frame in a unique pop culture moment. Leading up to the 2024 Seurat exhibition organized by the Art Institute, research by curatorial and conservation teams provided a clearer understanding of our painting. The research illuminated much about Seurat's painting practices and framing preferences. The Art Institute team designed a new white cushion profile fillet frame, and the glazing was also replaced. Thanks to a generous partnership with TrueView, we were able to secure a non-reflective sheet of laminated glass, custom made to fit the painting, which measures close to 7 feet tall by 10 feet wide. This detail is a historic photo from a 1892 show, and the frame that Seurat designed for the model's painting. We having a better understanding of how innovative and intentional Seurat was when it came to considering solutions for bringing the frame and painting into harmony. We chose to explore designs based on the outer frame instead of the frame depicted within the painting. So that was an example of how we got to the previous frame. There was a shift in how Seurat started to see the relationship of the edges of his paintings to the outside world. Surveying Seurat's original frames from 1888 to 1889 period, they're very light in appearance, project only slightly from the painting surface. Seurat uses Passepartout profile most frequently in that time period, based on our research. And this light, thin, flat, it brings to mind the window of a window mat for a work on paper. Surveying his original frames, you get the sense that he was disinterested in the ornamentation or architecture of the frame. And for some paintings, Seurat began to expand the painted border onto the frames. On others, Seurat's inner painted borders were often paired with white or light gray Passepartout frames. This expanded image from the 1892 gives us our best representation of the frames that Seurat selected for his paintings at the time. And he created a new outer frame for the Grande Jatte after reworking the painting in 1889. We believe that it would have had similar characteristics to these frames. Unfortunately, Seurat's personal framing choices were challenging to viewers, critics, and the art market of the time. And after his early death at the age of 31 in 1891, Seurat's innovative approach to framing was misunderstood and largely erased. His works entered the art market. And just take note of the painting to the right of models. By the time this exhibition in 1836, most of Seurat's original frames had been removed, overframed, or discarded. And you'll recognize the central painting from the previous image, minus what we suspect was a dark passepartout frame. So why are we reframing again? Taking what we learned from Seurat's framing preferences in our research, and after nearly 20 years of observing the cushion profile frame with Grande Jatte in the galleries, we felt it was time to explore a frame more aligned with the passepartout profile found on Seurat's last paintings. The reframing initiative was led by Gloria Groom, working in close collaboration with Kirk Velmont, a recently retired frame conservator. Kirk is an expert in the field of historical framing and a master craftsman. His passion for researching Seurat's frame cannot be understated either. And he was the creator of the new frame in every sense of the word. He was a designer, engineer, and craftsman. And as you will see in the next few slides, despite the long-standing interest in reframing the painting, one more time, it took years of planning and discussion before we were able to move forward in creating this one. So, prior to the work that started, like Kirk and Gloria have been milling this over for years. 2021 Art Institute was fortunate to receive a Bank of America Art Conservation Grant that enabled the museum to design a new frame and refresh the gallery where the Grande Jatte hangs. And this is an early concept drawing, which included a new wall and gallery design to enhance the painting's presentation. Through close study of historic frames and examination of original Seurat frames on works with interpainted borders from 1888 to 1889 period, we honed in on the passepartout profile for the new frame with a flat, wide molding and a white finish. Kirk made multiple frame samples to test in the galleries with the painting, varying in width and color and surface treatment until the final frame design was agreed upon. Choosing the right wall color was also critically important. Multiple options were explored before settling on a shade of dark gray. And you can just look in the right image, just a dramatic improvement of the overall presentation was made, clear in this slide. Once the frame design and wall color was selected, Kirk begins construction of the frame. Many of the large frames from the period were made from pine. One of the wood's benefits is exceptional dimensional stability. Warping over time can be a concern for boards at this scale and thinness. So to counter this, initial cuts were made by hand and a straight rift grain to get a straight rift grain pattern for the board. Kirk designed its joinery to hide the strength and complexity under a miter. So if you look at these two shots, you can see the top and the bottom on the left. And the left image is a face where you just see a closed miter. And beneath you see a mortise and tenon that creates more surface area for gluing and strength to support the glazing and keep the miters closed. And I'm just highlighting the angles that he beveled those edges to make sure that the shoulders slide together and just stay locked together so that the miter in the front never opens up over time. Outside of the drill press, Kirk did all the joinery work by hand. And here's a look at the before and after when he cleared the leftover material from the mortise. You get a better view of the bevel he cut into the bottom tenon to keep the corners in place. The painting looks rectangular, but is really trapezoidal, and due to the popularity of the work with our visitors, we weren't able to take the painting off the wall for an extended period of time. So we built a wooden template that we used to ensure the accuracy of our sight angles and measurements. And this is Kirk on the floor in our shop using the template to guide the adjustments to the miters and joinery of the frame. And when this stage was complete, he took a lot of care and just kind of hand carving the rebate to ensure an accurate fit of the painting, to allow full exposure of Seurat's painted border, which is somewhat unevenly painted. So after the work is done on the floor and it's joined, Kirk, he hand planes the surface and then he scrapes it with straight blades. And then the wood is oxidized and with tannic acid and potassium dichromate before white paint layers are carefully built up over time. This clip you see work on the project is completely taken over our shop. The painted frame eventually appears in the background. You can see it back there. The scale of the painting and the weight of the laminated glass call for extra reinforcement. This back frame was part of Kirk's overall design plan to enforce the path to molding and increase the internal depth of the painting and for its many components in internal package. They add significantly to the space needed to fit it all inside. So the back frame is beveled at the top and sides to recede into the shadows when seen from the side. And at the bottom, it's square so that it helps rest solidly on the steel-mounted L brackets that we use during installation. So we're fast forwarding to the install. The frame is complete. The work by our carpenters and painters to rehab the gallery looks beautiful. And you can see the installation team has already secured those brackets I mentioned to the wall. The final additions to the frame are those 3 little robust steel plates placed along the top rear of the back frame. And Kirk designed these so that they sit just out of view once they're installed on the wall. And it's a small detail, but when you look at images of previously, you can always see them in the background holding it up. So it was just like a nice little refinement to improve the overall presentation. So the glass has to be transferred from the old frame to the new frame and positioned in the gallery. It weighs approximately 300 pounds. So you can see like there's a whole team of us there to help get that kind of squared away and safely installed into the new frame. And then the painting is installed facing the wall, taking most of our team while the handful of us are with the artwork. The rest of our team is getting ready for the next step. So this is our first glimpse of the painting in the new frame. It's easily the most terrifying part of this install. I've done it a few times. I refer to it as like the spin and no return. It's backed away from the wall upright and rotated on pads 180 degrees. And though you can't see it, all the rest of the people that were in the earlier photos are behind the frame right now, either pulling pads or keeping it stable, keeping it vertical. And then finally, the installation of the Grande Jatte in the galleries with its newly painted and reinforced wall, the painted frame and glazing weigh over about 400 pounds. So we need 2 rolling ladders and a whole staff of art handlers for the install. And I just wanted to get a shot from the side. You can see what I was talking about earlier. The vantage point illustrates Kirk's design and what it achieved what it sought to. The back frame disappears into the shadows, giving the painting and frame a lighter streamlined appearance. Kirk's ingenious frame design is both a feat of engineering and a tribute to Seurat's unique painting preferences. Framing Seurat framing any Seurat, let alone La Grande Jatte, is a humbling task. And as a framer, it puts you in an unenviable position of trying to complete something the artist considered integral to the painting. Our hope is that in trying to honor Seurat's framing preferences, this new frame will serve La Grande Jatte in the same way Seurat's surviving frames have, by providing a clean, calming border that allows a viewer to more clearly focus on the incredible color balance and beauty of the work. Again, thank you, AGO, for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for the many people involved in this project.
Thank you, Chris, and Allison behind the scenes. I always love seeing all this frame construction stuff that I know so well, but see how it's actually done. And it was also so nice to see Kirk and his frame brilliance and your team working on the frame. And now for a very specific to a longer view, I'm pleased to introduce Sacha Marie Levay, Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, Journal of a Framer. Thank you, Sacha.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'd like to start off by thanking Adam and Julia for your steadfast commitment in putting this conference together no matter what. After all that we've heard over the past 2 days, it's very humbling to speak near the end. As a lover and keeper of frames, I'm in awe of the amazing research, rigor, and eloquence of the previous speakers' talks and work. This inspires me to ask you to bear with me. My talk will be confronting on many levels, as when I started, there wasn't much as far as Canadian frames went. After more than 3 decades at the MMFA, there's still so much to learn with regards to the history and making of frames, which is exciting, which is motivating, which is, when speaking before an inspiring community that is assembled here, humbling. Founded in 1879, the MMFA consists of 5 pavilions housing an encyclopedic collection of around 47,000 works. The Quebec and Canadian collection makes up a third of it, and 1,600 of them are paintings. In 2011, with the opening of a new pavilion for these artworks, we undertook the most important framing project in the museum's history, and it is ongoing. Frame history is relatively new in Canada, and referral material is quite scarce. Still, in the early 90s, a position for a painting conservation technician was created, with a focus quickly evolving towards the care for frames. This compensated for a previous lack of resources and highlighted the fact that frames do have an impact on the appreciation of paintings. Having cared for many hundreds of frames, restoring, reproducing, or recycling has given me the privilege of witnessing framing trends within the museum's context. These observations might resonate within other Canadian institutions. There are a few things that have informed us about framing tendencies at the MMFA: gallery design, the inventory of our frames, the shift towards historic framing, acquisitions, and intention. Gallery design is often intertwined with trends in framing. As elsewhere over the past century, the MMFA's galleries evolved from salon hangings to sparser exhibition design. Between the 1880s and 1920s, dense double and triple hangings were in vogue, as were ornate, gilded, and grand salon frames. They adorned paintings acquired from wealthy owners with the financial means to purchase fine European frames. Although those made in Canada and Quebec were of somewhat more modest design, materiality, and technique, they speak of the particular aesthetics and means of the region. Our collection boasts both grand frames and more modest, local, artisanal, or commercial interpretations of them. Between the 1920s and 50s, galleries, as well as framing styles, echoed the turbulence of the times and were more discreet. Frames were unadorned or plain or lightly ornate, painted with color or bronze paints, or gilded with silver leaf or slag metal. Galleries aligned with this sobriety. Between the 60s and 80s, with design tending towards minimalism and the rejection of ostentatiousness in the 70s, ornate gilded frames were removed and stacked along the basement hallways and eventually, incredibly, put out to the curb. Somehow there aren't photos of this, only memories survived. As well, the lack of resources at the time further justified the removal and replacement of damaged period frames. These historic rejects were replaced by generic frames that we suspect were initially meant to be used as travel frames. Since the 90s, there's a return to a sense of historic gallery design, with hints to past hanging styles intermixed with bold color statements and create new space configurations. Oh, sorry. What the frame we endeavored to make do an inventory in the early 90s. The inventory of our frame storage was like witnessing a time warp. Nearly 200 frames were discovered under a dusty store well, abandoned for various reasons. Since then, dozens have been restored and reassociated with their partner painting, while unassigned frames have been recycled, adapted, and reused. This collection has grown and evolved thanks to change in framing trends, donations, purchases, and paintings acquired in inappropriate frames. The inventory made us question why the frames were discarded, what replaced them on the paintings, and where their partner paintings were. Although it's been difficult to get exact answers as to why they were discarded, we have slowly found answers to some other questions. This is the evolution of our frame storage, gotten better, thankfully. Old identification labels at the back of frames signal some original pairings that could finally be reunited after long separations. This information highlighted past framing trends, showing for one thing how damaged frames weren't the priority, and either removal or simple treatments had to do the trick. Quick touch-ups, bronze paint, bad fills, and unsightly reconstructions. One such frame was associated with a painting by Henry Roland Evely, the fortune teller. The clearly marked frame was in very bad condition, with its humble yet compelling craftsmanship made us suspect that it was created by the artist himself. Our hunch was confirmed by his wife. On the left, the frame that was found in storage. On the right, what it was exhibited in the 80s, 90s. This is the frame once restored. Some frames were deemed too elaborate for times when fashion aimed for discretion. A simple solution was to exhibit paintings in their liner, a bit like not wearing one's pants. I can hear you laugh. Finding the frame linked to the McNichol, the McNichol painting that's been still exhibited at the moment, made us realize that this is what had happened to that painting. Bear in mind that it was the early 90s and awareness about historic frames was relatively new to me. The discovery at the time was eye-opening. The frame was restored and reunited with its liner. Some frames were considered uninteresting. Pochades are little sketches on wood panels. They're painted sketches on wood panels. During the 1900s, collectors were treating them as small paintings and framing them as such, using humble little frames typical to pochades. During the 70s, because they were considered Reconsidered as preparatory sketches for paintings, they were exhibited unframed and placed on shelves and showcases. Later, they were treated as works on paper, and the little paintings were matted and put into aluminum frames, fashionable at the time for prints and drawings. When preparing for a show of these works and having access to this historic frames in storage, thanks to the inventory, reproduction frames were made to compensate for those that had been discarded. With the renewed interest in presenting each one as a painting rather than a preparatory work was exciting. Here you see some reproductions of the pochade frames, adapted to each painting, actually. A shift towards more historically correct frames in the 90s made us notice that how many paintings were rehoused in commercial frames. This was due to the 90s move toward streamlined, more minimalist profiles that I spoke of earlier. Frames were made with generic commercial molding, camouflaged and adapted to each painting. Although historically inadequate, many ended up being permanent companions to many paintings. With a simple coat of paint or imitation gilding techniques, this strategy ended up being amazingly adaptable, as you can see here. Commercial frames also came in handy to replace damaged period frames that couldn't be restored with the resources at hand. But with a change in perspective, more information, and the intent to contextualize paintings over the years, many have since been replaced with more adequate historic settings that were made in-house. Still, many paintings are waiting their turn to find more historically appropriate companions. This was made for the opening of the new Bourgie Pavilion. Acquisitions and the influence of collectors and dealers. Acquisitions offer insight into what collectors' tastes are and what the art market favors. While some newly acquired works have never been unframed, what a treat, others have recently been reframed by donors with an intention of improving the appearance of a work. This is a painting by Emily Carr, 1911, acquired in a commercial frame. Max Stern was an important donor to the museum, and his collection was identifiable by the signature frame style that he fancied. A pseudo Louis XIV frame with the typical beige overcoating. These two paintings were offered by Max Stern. I don't remember when. It was deemed respectful that the museum keep the donated works in these types of frames, attesting to the history of the painting, as well as the important contribution of the donor. Finding a similar frame in storage, it didn't seem inappropriate to use it for another Carr painting. This frame was restored and it happened to fit perfectly on the painting. So it seemed at the time an obvious choice. At times, frames have an element of historic interest that merits being documented and saved. These frames are kept in storage. I don't have a proper photo of the frame on the Le Duc painting when it came into the collection, but at the time it was decided it desperately needed to be changed. The alternative chosen at the time to replace it seemed like a mistake to me later on, and I looked forward to correcting the mistake. Preparations for a work in which the painting, preparations for a show in which the painting was requested was an opportunity to fix the situation. A period-looking frame was found in storage and adapted. It was cut down. Yes, Julia, it was cut down. The ethical qualms that Julia mentioned yesterday didn't affect our decision to cut it down. The frame didn't seem to have much historic value. So here it is in its new surrounding. Research and collaborations. Institutions with similar collections are great collaborators when it comes to frame references. Discussions, visits, photos, and the sharing of sufficient data to reproduce profiles and finishes allow us to expand our knowledge and contribute to our decision-making. This collaborative relationship with institutions, mainly in Quebec and Ontario, and at times in Europe, contributes to maintaining a historic coherence within a relatively burgeoning history of frames in Canada. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank these partners for the spirit of sharing that enriches our field and our days. This is a molding library, which is the fruit of these collaborative efforts and research. This Pelin was acquired in a commercial frame that we wanted to replace by a more suitable, historically inspired one. The Musée National des Beaux-Arts du Québec allowed us to benefit from their research into the historic framing of their extensive collection of Pelin paintings. Their framer generously shared sketches and thoughts after discussions, we were able to rehouse ours. Here we have a hanging of modernist paintings, and the painting on the right is by Pelin as well. So the framer gave us sketches for possible profiles that we could use on ours, and this is how it is framed now. We are confident that it has historic relevance. In alignment with the framing trend we caught on to at the time, creating a historic context for each work has been our intent since the 90s. We jumped into this current wholeheartedly, even if at times we could only suggest historicity. I'm going to jump back because I sort of skipped talking about this one, and I'm going to wing it. This painting was acquired in a commercial frame. We had frames in storage that we tried out to see how it would look with in different settings. We collaborated. I contacted the museums that you see on the right, and we settled on this profile, which resembled a frame that was in a book that was mentioned by Anita Gowers of historic frames in Australia. And we had the profile cut down. I found in our galleries a frame of about the same period as the painting and loved the molding, the ornaments. So reproduced the ornaments and had them made the ornaments for the frame. This was a project, an in-house project, obviously. And so here you have the frame finished and is now hanging in the galleries as a new acquisition. So yes, wholeheartedly jumping into the current of historic frames. We used form, proportion, materiality, and finish, and applied to varying degrees and in different ways. It has helped to instill a sense of historic context when proper replicas or genuine period frames were out of reach. Working within our means and with what we have on hand, or creating well-meaning reproductions, we've been devoted to historic contextualization of our paintings. Here again, we worked with the National Gallery of Canada to change this painting by Prudence Heward, a very important painting in our collection. We see in photographs of the time that the painting was exhibited in a white frame. And like the speaker before me, we didn't choose to do that. We preferred to go towards this frame on the same a painting by the same artist. And after getting sketches and discussing finishes with the National Gallery and the curators, decided on a silver finish to better highlight the colors of the painting. So recycling, my favorite part. I love recycling frames, which is probably ethically wrong, but we do a lot of it here. With the opening of the new pavilion of Quebec and Canadian art, we found this painting by Barnsley was exhibited in an L-shaped frame since probably over 50 years. There are no records about this, but it's probably a victim of previously mentioned frame removals. It was stained in the stained wood and was requested in the 90s that I painted brown, as stain was considered unsightly in the 90s. I know this is ghastly. With the new pavilion's opening, we found this newspaper clipping from 1915, shortly after the painting's acquisition. We could consider this to be its earliest framing. Because of deadlines and budget, making a proper reproduction or finding a historic frame was impossible. So showing the painting without making any change was also impossible. So leftovers of large industrially made moldings were used to give the painting a more subtle presence, actually, and volume. It was painted over and a gold liner was added for a subtle sense of historicity. Though obviously a compromise, this temporary solution quietens the urgency for a proper replacement. Here are some makeovers made from frames found in storage. I can almost hear some of you cringe at the thought of recutting or altering them, but none of them had attributions or historic value, as they are commercial frames from another time, only more suitable to our present tastes. The paintings on the left were acquired with this framing choice, and on the left is the change that we made. The frame on the right here was previously stained, carved wood, and for this painting was gilded to highlight the importance of a new acquisition, and possibly coherent with a 1922 date line. Again, reframing from commercial to a more historic idea of framing. The frame on the right was previously, the frame on the left was the commercial frame, and on the right, the frame was a recut and adapted to the painting, more suitable for 1949. This painting was acquired unframed, and a frame in storage that had been purchased from a frame shop that went out of business was considered a good home. We really love this painting, and it was great to be able to give it a good housing. Reproductions and the use of the gallery as source of inspiration. Shopping for ideas in our galleries on the left, a frame for a pochade seemed like an option that would support the period and sobriety of the acquisition on the right. A copy was made. Kent Monkman is a contemporary artist that fancies historic looking frames. Kitsch is not a problem. The frame we had made was inspired by one in our galleries that happens to be on one of the paintings that inspired Monkman's work. This was commissioned for the opening of our pavilion in 2011. This is the painting that partly inspired his work and the frame that was on it. So now it's hanging in the same gallery, on the same floor, and the beavers are almost impossible to notice. Unresolved questions. I'm almost done. I don't know if I'm late. If you remember the commercial molding that was used sparingly in the 90s, you'll notice that this frame is made of that very molding. Because of this, And because this artist tended to make his own frames, this is also Evely, we presume that it didn't correspond to the artist's intent. But because it was signed by the artist at the back, we had to preserve it. It was cleaned and eventually refinished because the paint was very damaged. As we've learned over the past 2 days, frames have a definite impact on the aesthetic and historical appreciation of a painting. Having started from scratch in the field with few references and resources, it has been challenging to deal with Canadian frames. At the museum, I've been creating markers of our work done on our frames in the past 30 years. There's now a catalog of empty frames available for use, a library of period moldings, books, a growing interest within the institution, contacts and collaborators, and an enthusiastic will to learn and do more. And yes, there is a long way to go. We are at the beginning of an exciting journey that I am hopeful other Canadian frame enthusiasts, makers, and historians will embark on, marking the foundations for a Canadian history of frames. In finishing, I can't help but share this portrait and its frame, made by the neighbor of the artist, a local woodworker. Though modest in means and style, it is to me perfect. A humble yet strong statement that may withstand the evolving trends and questioning about framing in Canada because of its pure simplicity. Content, context, and history inseparable, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Sacha. That was terrific. It really was. And it's so nice to see so many painted frames added back. I really loved the last one. The changing out of historic frames for minimalist models is just a sad story that's common across many museums from the late 20th century. I also appreciated your separate considerations of frames for paintings versus those for works on paper. They're often adapted or different designs for those two things. And your molding library is fascinating. And so glad it's being shared among Canadian museums. It'd be great if it could be shared to a larger public at some point too. And I hope I get to meet with you in New York next week, but we'll talk off camera. We look forward now to a journey at another museum here in America. I'd like to welcome Allison Jackson from Harvard Art Museums, who we've also worked with on a decade of intentional framing at Harvard Art Museums. Allison?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much to Adam and Julia for hosting this conference on frames. Harvard University, where I completed this work, is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. My role as the Harvard Art Museum's first staff frame conservator began in 2012 during a historic renovation uniting the Fogg, Sackler, and Busch-Reisinger museums under one roof in a building designed by the renowned Italian architect Renzo Piano. For the first time, a dedicated conservator of frames was hired to elevate the condition of the existing frames in their newly constructed contemporary setting and to create new historically accurate frames for artworks in need. In addition to the conservation treatment of frames, finding the right frame for a painting is a driving force in my daily activities now more than ever and consists of several broad categories of work. Creating entirely new frames based on existing profiles, sourcing historically accurate frames from within the museum and outside of it, and altering existing frames in a variety of ways, including the addition or removal of ornament, changing the color of a frame based on historic evidence, the replacement of frame liners, and removing the space around paintings that float within their frames. I will draw from over a decade's worth of reframing projects to highlight examples from each category, and will explore the rationale behind our choices made for the selected artworks. The Master of the Fog Pietas Lamentation over the Dead Christ, a fragment of the predella of a large 14th century altarpiece, was one of the first and most elaborate framing interventions that I've undertaken at Harvard. Building on my relationships to a talented network of woodworkers and frame conservators, I created a multi-lobed engaged frame to replace a reproduction cassetta-style frame that did not accurately represent the artwork. An X-radiograph hints at the location of the panel's original engaged frame, which you can see outlined here. The creation of this complex frame warranted a trip to London to visit the Courtauld, home of two neighboring panels from the same predella, St. Lawrence, which retained its original engaged frame, and the Bishop's Saint, of which National Gallery frame conservator Isabella Cockham made a new frame for circa 1998. Seeing these in person was key for me to get a sense of the proportions of the molding and an understanding of the quality of the final finish that I was about to undertake replication of. I was also able to look through the files and take an impression with the dental impression material of the molding of the original frame. At the National Gallery, Isabella and I talked through the finishing process of the frame she had recently made. She generously shared the template she used in recreating the design found on the edges of the original, a floral pattern of punchwork executed with silver gilding, sand, and blue pigment. To construct the frame, I contracted my colleague Philip Lowe, a master carpenter and North Bennett Street School graduate, and owner and director of the Furniture Institute of Massachusetts, a fine woodworking school in Beverly, Mass. Known for his replicas of Samuel McIntyre chairs at the Peabody Essex Museum, Phil was an expert carver. A dear colleague and friend, I'm sad to say that Phil passed away in January of 2021. Phil created the frame for the Lamentation over the Dead Christ out of a single plank of pine. While most of the carving was done in his shop, the fine-tuning of the inside of the rabbet, carefully carved to conform to the uneven surface of the panel, was done on site at the museum. Once the construction was complete, and after experimentation with materials, many mock-ups were made, I finished the frame using the template and advice provided by Isabella, which was to apply the gesso onto linen and crack it after drying to achieve a more natural-looking pattern in the frieze of the frame, rather than carving in fake cracks after the fact. In conversation with Stefan Molahogian, our European curator at the time, we ultimately decided to depict only a portion of the decorative pattern found throughout the predella on two sides of the frame to aid in representing it as a fragment of a much larger work. The before and after images reveal the success of the new frame, covering an expanse at the top of the artwork that previously appeared damaged and recovering the original shape of the painting. To share this project with the public, multiple articles were published in Index, the Harvard Art Museum's online magazine at the time the work was ongoing. Here are a few more examples of historically accurate frames that were created prior to the 2014 reopening. The projects are wide-ranging in terms of the resources that are available to them. While the frame for the Master of the Fog Pietà took around 250 hours to execute, these examples are less complex. New molding profiles were researched and selected in collaboration with curatorial, constructed by a local contractor and finished on site. The frame for the Finolia on the right took longer because of its scale at 7.5 feet by 6 feet and was put together in-house using its previous frame as a liner. The need for new frames seems to have snowballed as curatorial departments across the museum have recognized the impact of reframing on their collections. Here are a few of my recent favorites, all of whose construction was again outsourced to a local frame maker, Brett Stevens, and then finished in-house by myself. They cover 4 different departments within the museum. The frame for Study for Blossoms on the upper right, one of my personal favorites, was years in the making. It was born out of a fellows research project collaborated on with colleagues in the UK at Tate Britain and Guildhall Art Galleries, and inspired and resulted in a gallery rotation titled Framed the Victorians, focusing on frames in our pre-Raphaelite galleries. The 2 examples on the bottom were much quicker turnarounds, the Feininger for a loan and the Hopper for an exhibition, and both were based on existing profiles found at the museum. The Sargent frame profile was adapted and produced after a quick research trip across the river to the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and loosely based on a frame identified there. This is the 4th time we have used this frame profile on Sargent's oil sketches. The next category of ways in which paintings are reframed at the Harvard Art Museums is sourcing historically accurate frames. While I was working primarily with the European department on historic reproductions before the 2014 reopening, Lynette Roth, our frame-savvy Daimler curator of the Busch-Reisinger Museum, was working closely with the workshop of Werner Rahman in Germany to reframe the majority of the paintings in our German Expressionist collection, and the relationship has continued ever since. Murr has been a great resource for us. In addition to an inventory of historic frames that can be resized, they draw from an archive of historic photographs to create reproduction frames and replicas when the intentions of the artist are known, which is often the case for this group of artists. The QR code is a link to a fabulous live art talk that Lynette gave on the reframing that was done by Murr for the Busch-Reisinger galleries before the 2014 reopening. Here are 2 recent examples of new frames that were sourced from Murr. Both are historic frames that were cut down to fit our paintings. I added a 3rd photo of the Beckmann below because we decided to slightly alter the tone of the frame after it came in. The knots in the frame were competing with the sunrise in the painting, so we flipped it around and toned the frame back so knots in the wood wouldn't stand out as much. We are currently working with the German framers on the reframing of 7 Edvard Munch paintings that will be on view in the upcoming exhibition, Edvard Munch Technically Speaking. We have worked with other framers as well, including Gil and Lagodich, of whom Tracy is our moderator for the upcoming session. An example of sourcing historic frames from within the museum is Edward Mitchell Bannister's Cove at Sunset. This painting was acquired in early 2022 by my curatorial colleague, Horace Ballard, who immediately alerted me of the need for a new frame. The acquisition included this frame, likely put on by the seller, Aka Galleries. It was not appropriate for the painting in scale, style, or condition. It is entirely overpainted with a bright gold-colored paint and more suited in scale to a work of art on paper than a painting. I planned a research trip to determine what would be an appropriate frame for Bannister's work, optimistic that the Smithsonian American Art Museum, which holds over 140 paintings by the artist, could point to a common thread among his framed artworks. In Washington, D.C., I was hosted by my friend and colleague, Gwen Manthe, Sam Painting's conservator, who is currently treating and researching paintings by the Canadian-born African-American artist. In addition to seeing many of the works by Bannister on view at the museum and in storage there, we took a trip to the Smithsonian's off-site storage facility and met with their longtime frame conservator, Martin Kotler, to comb through the myriad of Bannister frames out there. Unfortunately, there was no consistency in the framing. While there were a variety of 19th century frames, many of the works were commercially framed or had no sufficient frames of their own, often just weather stripping to protect the painting. In fact, Martin had framed many of the banister works himself. Also pictured above is a Robert Duncanson painting, another Black artist and contemporary of Bannister that hung on one of the screens in storage at the Smithsonian side by side with the banisters. Take a good look at its frame, likely an American version of the Louis XVI style. It becomes important momentarily. Because ironically, days before I was about to leave for DC, I came across a Louis XVI frame that had formerly belonged to the newly acquired Degas drawing, young woman laying on a chaise lounge. Because of its poor condition, and in order to align with the display of other drawings in the collection in standard frames, a decision had been made not to retain the frame for the Degas. This turned into a perfectly timed coincidence. A test fitting on the banister proved that it was perfect in color and tone. The warm gold with a red bowl showing through was complementary to the subtle pink and purple hues of the painting, and the repetitive nature of the continuous neoclassical ornamentation made it a perfect candidate for scaling down. The frame was cut down in our exhibitions department's woodshop and reassembled in the paintings lab. It still needed conservation treatment after the fact, fills and ornament replacement to the top and outside edges of the frame. Here it is in its new frame, recently installed in the exhibition Future Minded, New Works in the Collection. The 3 1/8 inch wide molding is more suited to that of a painting than its previous frame and gives weight and presence to the relatively small painting. In the final category of reframing, aesthetic intervention of existing frames, my first example is the frame for Corrado Jaquinto's The Presentation in the Temple. This is another early example that required treatment before the 2014 renovation. The arch-shaped frame was butt joined and reinforced with bending plates and dowels that failed under the pressure of the warping frame members. 2 crudely painted liners, 1 red and 1 gold, also in pieces, served to complement the beveled wooden main molding. The hanging hardware was attached to the stretcher rather than the frame, making the painting the support for the frame rather than the reverse. The initial goal was simply to stabilize the structure. We also determined that we could increase the sight opening and replace the painted double liner with a single gilded one. Then, as many projects do, this one became more elaborate than what we had originally intended. Discussion with curatorial eventually resulted in a plan to gild the entire frame. The late 18th century painting is one of a series of 10, designed for the sacristy of the Neapolitan church San Luigi. In a nod to how it would have been originally installed, a half-round element was chosen to adorn the outside edge of the frame, drawing on architectural elements. A flexible, extruded polyurethane molding used in the building materials industry was sourced from flexible molding concepts and was the perfect solution to curve around our arched top frame. Here is the painting, now supported by the frame as it hangs as a focal point in the 18th century galleries today. The frame's gilded surface and larger molding give the painting more presence and allude to its earlier life in a religious setting. An archival photograph of the painting drove our decision to strip the black paint from Max Beckmann's The Actors triptych. Historic photos of the paintings installed in the St. Louis Art Museum shortly after they were painted revealed that the frames have a transparent finish and are constructed of a light-colored wood. While we unfortunately don't know what happened to their original frames, their modern counterpart now agrees with their original state, freeing the artworks from their dark border. An ongoing practice at the Harvard Art Museums is replacing grimy, stained fabric frame liners with new ones that complement the frame surface. The taste for linen liners, popular with collectors in the 40s and 50s, was taken into consideration as part of the history of these pieces, but the argument to remove them outweighed the benefits of keeping them. This can best be explained by looking at the before and after photographs and has proven to be the case time and time again. Here are a few examples of how the light border confines the painting and interrupts the eye when viewing the artwork. I created a liner profile with a cove at the sight edge, which we keep in stock and is used regularly to replace insufficient liners. Another issue of mismatch in framing taste between gallerist and museum that we come across regularly in our German collections is the floating frame. It may be hard to discern in these photos, but these are several examples of frames that have been replaced or resized with the goal of removing the space around the painting. When it comes to framing in a museum setting, it's important to set aside one's own taste. In the case of these mid-20th century artworks, the floating frame was neither complementary to the painting or mandated by the artist. Sorry, it was neither contemporary to the painting or mandated by the artist. The Helt and Mamen frames are new historic reproduction frames that were made on site at the museum, but I grouped them here because they were previously floated. Finally, I like to conclude with this project because it's so clearly stated here on the back of the artwork. In the words of the artist Richard Tuttle, above a labeled diagram in all caps, it reads, "This drawing must be framed like this." And on the left, this becomes an artwork once it is framed according to instructions RT. As many artists do, Tuttle clearly had strong feelings about the way his artworks are framed. So, in accordance with the instructions of the artist before the artwork went on view last May in the American Watercolors exhibition, the frame was constructed and finished in-house by my colleague Adam Baker, senior conservation technician in the paper lab. I gave Adam a lesson on the finishing process, including sanding, gesso, and gilding. And he and I then gave a gallery talk focusing on frames in the exhibition. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's important that we all think about frames as integral to the artwork they surround. At the Harvard Art Museums, we are working hard to return artworks to their original framing context when that intent can be discerned. Here are a few more examples of reframing projects that I did not get a chance to talk about today. Still, just a selection of examples of both large and small scale interventions that have taken place at the Harvard Art Museums over the past decade plus. I never imagined that this category of work would be such a large and growing part of my role as a museum frame conservator. I truly love these projects. The transformations are so rewarding. I am really looking forward to some of the projects that we have on the calendar for the next few years as well. I am the sole conservator dedicated to frames at the Harvard Art Museums, and a part-time at that. None of these projects would have been possible if it were not for my coworkers and the vast network of colleagues that I have built over the years. Yet the field of frames conservation can still seem small and underrepresented at times. I am truly grateful and honored to be speaking here today and hope to both expand my network and to share the knowledge I have gained to foster the growth of our field. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Allison. And also congratulations on your appointment as the first frame conservator at Harvard. I've been there a long time now, but it's great. And I appreciate the in-depth study that you're doing there. And also, thank you for replacing those linen liners. Understanding that one sometimes does need to set aside one's own taste in a museum setting. It's something we come across all the time.
Hi, everyone. We're going to get started again. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Hubert Baya, our friend here at AGO, who has had such a huge influence on the way that we approach frames after working here for 2 years. It was great inspiration to us. So here he is. Hubert Baya worked as a senior conservator at the Rijksmuseum Conservation and Science Department in Amsterdam for 30 years until retirement. He was responsible for restoring, researching, and co-curating its collection of 7,000 picture frames. He also taught and coached conservation students, interns, and mid-career professionals internationally. Now settled in California, Hubert consults with museums and collectors on the conservation and curating of frames and gilded wooden objects, and continues teaching traditional gilding techniques, conservation, and the history of picture frames in hands-on workshops and through online courses at the University of Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and at the Beloit College Center for Collections Care in Wisconsin. Hubert Baya is a member of the Historians of Netherlandish Art, a professional member of the American Institute for Conservation, and served as co-chair in the Wood, Furniture, and Lacquer Working Group of the International Council of Museums Conservation Committee. Over to you, Hubert.
Thank you for the kind words. We did build up some friendship in many hours in the vaults with the large frame collection in Toronto, and our lunches outside in the park. Yes, what can you still speak about after such wonderful lectures? I've been inspired. At first, it was a bit hard to set the alarm for 4 a.m. to sit ready at 5 a.m. again. But then I told myself it's a lot better than jet lag and going through the airport experiences. I very much enjoyed Lynn's overview of the historiography of the frames and Philip's eye-opening view on the Mexican works. I'm living closer to it now, and I once in a lifetime lived there for a year, so I'm going to look around there with new eyes. Marco, really, you did a good job on analyzing the Maratha, and Federica also opening our eyes to the arabesque. That's a word I've heard half a century ago from the mouth of my teachers at the Art Academy to describe how you should look at drawing models. So look at the figure describing an arabesque. So there's more uses. And then the last but not least of the ones I'm going to highlight is Marie Dubost. That's so close to my heart, that recutting. And that's one thing I'm still doing in my time that I have now being retired. I'm going to share a presentation with you now. I'm going to take you through a passion of mine that has been well fed in my career to research the original finish on things. It's part of a PhD that I'm still trying to pull together, although that will be more about profiles of frames, the shapes, than the finish. Today we will just look at the finish. Framing, of course, is something that has not been with man in the same way for tens of thousands of years. The frames were just found, the framing, the context. And you see the same approach or approach to the same subject here with some 16 to 13,000 years in between. And the frame on the right is the original frame to that painting, which was a prize given annually to the best archer in Amsterdam, and he would be given a prize auction. And the story is told in the painting and around it. And that is showing how important the frame is for the story. I'll take you to a very limited part of the planet, geographically, but influential culturally. The Netherlands in the 1400s were part of what is called the Duchy of Burgundy. Very, very rich and sophisticated culture at the time, nurturing artists like Jan van Eyck, for example. He had a particular interest in the frames. It was customary in the Middle Ages to watch out so I keep an eye on the time. The panel paintings were delivered to the painter in its frame. The painter may have had its influence on the shape of the frame, but then it was primed, frame and panel were primed together, and then the painter painted his painting, and the gilder did his gilding, if that was the case. The gilding, of course, always first, especially with oil painting, otherwise you get, well, dry so slowly, you don't want the gold to get stuck in the paint. So, but not always gilding, also painting. And this is a portrait Jan van Eyck made of his wife, Margaretha, and he painted the frame. I mean, there are no written records that say that he has done this, but it is most likely that he just continued to fund onto the frame, including like areas with that looks like chiseled letters that even further enforce the illusion of stone as a material. And this is from 1439, if I can read those numbers well. Another example of Jan van Eyck and his framing, this is at the Metropolitan Museum, where I was able to visit just on time to see these frames on display, and I made this montage, and maybe they are now back into their frames. On the left is a replica frame. It has to be the replicas because the letters on the frame are three-dimensional. It's like a fantastic set of information, and there is other text that is painted onto the frame. And these are some pictures during restoration. Then some half a century later, still in the 1400s, this portrait of a falconer was painted. I prefer it to call this painting the falconer rather than the official Rijksmuseum title, Engelbert II, Count of Nassau. It probably is Engelbert II, but the text on the bottom from two different hands, different times in history, that mention his name, Count of Nassau. And that text is on top of a green and black finish that is not original. That contains pigments. It's been refreshed once, so it's been painted on once and then painted on the second time. In the last layer is Prussian blue in the green, which was not developed, a pigment that was developed in the early 18th century, and I forgot what the other pigment was that is in the first black and green blocks, and that was not around till the 17th century. And most likely the text is correct in reflecting who it is, but we do not know. It's a piece that's about a foot tall, and the frame is integral. It is part of the panel. And it also had a frame on the back that has been removed long ago, but you see the traces of a molding that must have been glued on, still glue visible on the bottom, and that would have been an integrated frame, so that there was an integrated frame on the back and an integral frame is still on the front. This is on the left a cleaning test on the frame that was made in the early years of this century. And it reveals, luckily, a very fresh looking white brushstroke on a beige ground. And it suggests sort of a marble imitation, perhaps, a grisaille finish. That removing that altogether was something that my colleague, Laurent Suzanni, at the time that was restoring the painting, he made the cleaning test, and he and myself and several other conservation colleagues were quite in favor of removing the black and green blocks. But it was a bridge too far for the entire team, including the curators, because of the historical value of the letters, the text that was not original, and I have researched this enough to know that the letters were not underneath there before this overpaint. It went a bridge too far to remove that, also because we still have a kingdom in the Netherlands, or not still, but again, and they are still called Van Oranje-Nassau. So it was sensitive on several layers. You can see the profile. It's a flat area with an OG, and the gilding on the OG with its painted violets on it is all original, though abraded on the bottom on the flat so-called rain sill, where the profile is straight instead of curved. It is absolutely delightful to look at this. This is a piece of that gilded and painted area adjacent to the panel. And under it, it's maybe an inch wide in reality, so it's really enlarged. And this is the bottom. You see more abrasion there, a humoristic touch of the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, the trompe-l'oeil, the fingers going over the edge of the frame, and even the tail of the falcon. A delightful piece. The bottom right corner of this frame, you see on the left as it looks today, and on the right you see an X-ray of it. And if you just look on the left at the tendrils, the stems of the violets on the vertical part and on the horizontal part, they show up white. They show up in the X-ray. But if you look at the flat part with the green and black blocks, you see where the arrow is another meandering line. And there was another reason not to remove this finish, because there are certain areas where it has been very abraded underneath the black and green, so the restoration would have been intense. But if you think of this color you see on the left of the frame here. That's about 5/8 of an inch, maybe a centimeter and a half, revealing the beige finish. And if you think of that all over the frame, it may not be from marbleizing that white brushstroke. This kind of a painting is very akin to illuminated manuscripts with the flower borders, which are here on the gilding, and it may have had a grisaille, this is my best guess, grisaille border with more violets or flowers and tendrils going around, and forget the letters for now. It was probably a portable piece. It had no place in its context. The name of this conference is Frames in Context. The context for the previous piece would have been private devotion. It has no trace of hinges. It's probably maybe sat in a leather pouch and could travel with someone or be there for when this person was traveling, it could still be together. Just like the WhatsApp communications today. When I was in Canada, I had a WhatsApp marriage for a year, the videos. I'll take you to another context. This is a detail of the St. Lawrence church, medieval church in the city of Alkmaar. And this is the interior, high vaulted, and it would have had a huge altarpiece in the back that is now in the city of Nyköping. I forgot the exact name, in Sweden, because after the iconoclasm, many artworks were defaced, sculptures were pulled from their niches, shattered on the ground, paintings got scratches put into them, and vandalism in the 1566 and 72, and this would have been in 1566, more or less, the iconoclasm. The piece we will see after this has survived this. The altarpiece also was not destroyed. They were still probably aware that it had a certain value, and they sold it to the King of Sweden. That's why it's been there since centuries. But we're not going to look at that altarpiece. We're going to look at this piece that is almost 5 meters wide, about 15 feet, with 7 panels depicting the 7 works of charity, feeding the hungry, giving alms to the poor, burying the dead, and all those things. Just that you see there in one big frame, the wooden clamps are replacements of the nails that held the panels before, and the clamps allow for movement with climate changes, so there's no more splitting. And but the frame has been completely stripped. There's a text on it, but again, that is not entirely original, because there are photographs, black and white photographs, not relatively not too long ago, about a century ago, where the letters are not black but white, the same letters. So I think they're faithful to the text that was there. The date on the top member, 1504, there's no doubt about it. But it's bare. The detail of the frame and the painting and the profiles and the construction of the frame, these can all be found online since 2009 on this website, where you don't have to write this down frantically or take a picture of it. If you just Google Rijksmuseum, early Netherlandish paintings by artists before 1500, it's a long sentence, but it's not so difficult to remember. You will find about 170 paintings that have been researched by painters in the Netherlands, born in the Netherlands before 1500. And it was my good luck to get to make drawings of the profiles of the original frames on 28 of them, which is a very high percentage. But of course, religious pieces haven't changed hands and ownership as often as secular pieces like still lifes, portraits. It kept me busy. I looked at it and I found places where here are some locations where I took samples. These samples are very, very small. I have not covered them up. If you go to the Rijksmuseum, you can try to find them, but you probably wouldn't if I weren't there to help you out, because this is enlarged and it's a little greenish bluish. So I took samples in all these locations. This is my sketch sheet. And one sample I'll show you. The next slide is number 5, where you see the little yellow sticker on the right and a schematic locator on the bottom on the profile. It's in that groove, which actually is not correctly reproduced in the computer rendering of my hand drawings. It is not a hollow, but it's from the flat area, it goes straight down and then abruptly up to the hollow part, the wider hollow part. And that was probably, that's where they missed some of the scraping off the original finish at some point. On the right, you see like an area like this little strip here with the samples, but then on the other spots, you see a macro photo made with the iPhone through one of those handheld mini microscopes that some of you that have taken my classes got to take them home this summer. They're very handy to see something, and even if you have steady hand, you can make a picture. But here on the left is a sample, a cross sample that I was very lucky. All of them showed this ground layer and the blue layer, all the other 5 samples as well. And the blue, but this one, I had the good luck to see not only the gold between the layers, between the brownish layer and the bluish layer, but above there in the middle of the blue towards the very left, there is a skewing. Mind you, this was photographed under the microscope at 1,000 times. But what that tells me is that there was not only blue and gold on this frame, but that the gold was put on first, just as you would always do it, because you don't want to get these skewings in your paint. Yes, but the little one did get in there. So this is very exciting. None of that boring bare oak, but blue. Before I leave this slide, the base has lead white in it, and it also has minium in it, red lead. And that was a common ingredient around the very early 1500s in the Netherlands on picture frames to put in their ground. And it was not for color because the ground was not left visible, but most likely they figured out it would kill the bugs because lead is poisonous. In another altarpiece, I've seen a complete arms layer with hardly any chalk in it. Organ wings from ascribed to Jan Swart van Groningen, huge Gothic. And these, taking an X-ray of a detail generally takes an exposure of less than a minute, half a minute, something. But we didn't get to see anything on the frames till we exposed it for, if I remember well, about 7 minutes. And only then could we look through the thick layer, lead layer. And here is what it may have looked like. We will never know what tint of blue it was when it was finished, because the sample, of course, is much fresher. I had no way to make this a little greenish because I used the PowerPoint tools to make this reconstruction, overlaying different images. And the letters are not on there, but it's not such a sophisticated reconstruction, but it gives you a completely different feeling. And this is so typical of the late medieval playful imagery. This painter is probably in the same is a follower probably of Geert tot St. Jans, who will be our next subject. We don't know if this blue was marbleized, if it was more subdued than we see it here, but it definitely was blue and not black, like so many paintings, so many frames that have survived have been stripped and then painted black with some new gilding, and then usually oil gilding instead of water gilding, although this may be oil gilding originally too. Just a word about the bare spots on the panels. This was a subject, these paintings were scratched into, most of the faces have scratches in them, and in the 1970s it was decided, well, the paintings were restored, to not take that away, to be very conservative in their reconstructions, including other damage on the edges from probably water damage, not from flooding, but in a cold church with candles and stuff, there's condensation at times. Oh, it's not this one, but we'll see a few others. This is a closed triptych. The outside has been stripped, but the inside and profiles are still intact, or mostly intact. And so the outside would have had a finish on too, the oak. And when you open the wings, this is what you see. And this is a unique piece. This is the only reverse glass painting that survives, the oldest one that survives in Northern Europe. So the three pieces are a piece of glass, and it's still in there with in the wings. You cannot get to the glass because it is a closed construction with dowels and what have you. In the middle part, it is open in the back, and it has the original oak protective panel over it. Of course, we have put some more protective means in between, and it is, I don't think it's on display till my current colleagues or my then colleagues will sort out how to consolidate the flaking that is happening. But mind you, this is all painted in reverse. All the highlights have been painted first instead of in an oil painting, they are last, and then the backgrounds. So by just tweaking it in PowerPoint, changing nothing but the coloring, color saturation, you see what this triptych would have looked like, and not the 500-year-old discolored, darkened pattern on a red background. But this is it. I haven't painted anything in here or You see the dowels also sticking through on the top. One has a piece of paint chipped off, and the other pushed it up, but not off yet. So this is the left, sorry, this is the right wing when you turn it over from the outside version. These are the dowels. Just delightful to see those pieces. Another piece that's at the Maurits house. It's a little larger, maybe 2 feet tall. The wings may have been added to the central panel at a later date. They have a different kind of refinement finish on them. And the wings, when it's closed, they are marbleized. But they're marbleized much in the same manner that marbleizing was done on paper for a book. The Turkish imports, there was a strong trade in Bruges, where this probably was made, with the Orient also. And they had Oriental carpets on the table, and they had books, like we've seen in the presentation earlier with the Venetian books. You see on the bottom is that pattern that's painted on the red background, and enlarged is Moses holding up the tables. And this drawing is from either Dürer or his circle, and that must have circulated probably as an etching. Carol Potash of the Maurits has made that link to the original print. So here we move on to Geertgen tot St. Jans. This panel is like 4 feet tall, the panel alone, between maybe 110 centimeters. And these are frames that are not on it. Now, the one on the left is designed by the architect of the current Rijksmuseum building, Pierre Kuipers. He also designed for the opening of that building in 1855. The designs are still around in the Noord-Holland archives in Haarlem from the Rijksmuseum building drawings. He designed frames in a neo-Gothic style for various paintings and intended them to be unfinished with only sparse gilded, so partial gilt. Just as you see it, only this has had some bad storage problems because it's been removed from painting long ago, since 1885, and replaced in the 20th century, and we do not exactly know when, by this neo-Gothic frame. Why did they go so far and make ever more frame and busyness around it? At the time, in the 19th century, they did not have any Van Eyck at the Rijksmuseum, and they still do not have that. But at that time, they thought this was a Van Eyck, the Van Eyck of the Rijksmuseum. So very, very important, and a very, very important painting needs very much framing, something to underscore its importance. So it went ever bigger. But the painting was restored over a long period and was finished in the 1990s. While I was there, and I was asked to think about a better framing. The first thing I did was I went to the wonderful source by Helene Vroegstraten, available free online in English now, of the 15th and 16th century panel paintings and frames from Flanders. But that was her thesis, doctoral thesis in 1989. And I combed through that book, through contemporary paintings from the Netherlands, to find the narrowest possible original framing and translated it into the proportions of this painting. And framing was not really that pompous in most cases, maybe for sculpture groups, but not for paintings very often, or as part of an altarpiece, not a single piece. And on the working closely with Quen Towers, the restorer of the painting, we examined the barb on the painting, where the panel has split loose from its now missing engaged frame. And it's a little dike of paint, of primer, with paint on it and sometimes gilding. And all these several yards long around this painting, there was not any trace of gold. So it was clear that it did not ever have a painting, ever have a frame that had been gilded, at least on the side edge. But what we did find almost all the way around is 1 millimeter bright green paint. And so this, in this tone that you see it. So this was the first finish. I drew the profile. I actually borrowed the profile from the Falconer and made the flat part wider. It's the origin, and had the same bottom slanted edge. And but in our discussions, and we've had very, very good, very regular discussions all of my 3 decades with curators and conservators on board on the same occasions, a very open culture. But this went too far for the then curators. I certainly had some colleagues on my hand to keep this green, maybe tone it down to the 4th column from the right, just before the pinkish one, salmon-colored one. If you look in the painting, just before the altar, there are 2 pink columns and then 2 greenish, and that's a very common color in the 1400s in the north. So I would have probably toned it down to that, but when they saw this, some of the curators just fell off their chair, proverbially. And so I toned over it. I toned it down, and the green on the side edge, I let it shimmer through sort of a brick rind, and the outside is not black. You can actually see, depending on the color setting of your monitor, that there is some greenish shining through. That's for you when you go visit it. Here's a close-up of the panel on the left and the frame on the right, and you see the barb, the green on the edge of the painted surface, by shrinkage of the panel, you see the unpainted edge. And then, of course, I had to do this just for you that know it when you go to see it. I rubbed down the brick brick-colored scumble down to the green that you only see when you lean forward. And you remember that this was possible. So once again, a little closer up, the painted surface with the barb. I don't know if barb is called, this is spelled maybe with an E behind it, or that if that's a British American difference. But, so that green, I'm not making that up. In the Peter's Church, the Peterskerk in Leiden, which was built in the 1120s, there are columns. We'll see a picture of the interior of that church. And there are some remaining, I don't know if it's not fresco technique, but it's painted on, it's murals on the columns. And they're very badly abraded, but there are some remains. And look at this green. We make a step from Haarlem, where this painting by Geertgen was made, to Leiden, to this monastery a convent of nuns, and they commissioned artworks, of course, and we will look closely to that artwork. But first, the convent was near Leiden, now inside the city, in fact, but in Leiden, this is the Peter's Church, Peterskerk, on the right as it is today, and on the left as it can be found on a painting at the Ringling Museum by Van Vliet, and I think Hendrickson van Vliet. And that church would have been filled, just like the spaces in the convent, with colorful decorations on their columns, and also under every window would have been an altarpiece. And if you look between the two big columns on the left in the photograph, there's a small one in the distance behind the brass chandelier, and underneath you see an altarpiece under the window. It's a reproduction, and that is maybe still there, but it was placed there as they would have been placed. And that is very big. Yes, it would start about 5 feet above the floor. And this is not the altarpiece in this photograph that we will examine, but another one. Both of them are kept in the museum, the Lakenhal, and they survived the iconoclasm. So the piece you just saw is a time and a half bigger than this. It would be behind you in this room in the museum by Lucas van Leyden. But we look at this altarpiece by Cornelis Engebrechts, the first documented important painter of Leiden. Some people that got together on the eve of the iconoclasm, literally on the day, they got together and moved a few of those altarpieces out of the church to the city hall, where they lived into the 19th century, and now they're in the Museum of Lakenhal. And this is gilded and painted black, and there's sculpted ornamentation, finials on the central part that have mostly broken off. They must have been really sticking out in like Gothic architecture. And if you, as you can see it today, look at the back of it, you can look around it. This is the wing, the right wing. And you see this little rectangle on the frame, which is enlarged on the bottom. This is a cleaning test that I made. The paintings were restored elsewhere several years ago. The frames came to me in the Rijksmuseum, not to restore them, purely to research. It was a wonderful covenant between two museums. And this is a cleaning test that I made. A restorer had already made a small one on the front, but we'll get to that later. Just imagine this whole thing was built, you see the built out of stone blocks with painted stone blocks with mortar in about 1520, in the colors that match exactly the painted architecture on the panels on the outside of the triptych. It was very well coordinated. This technique was found with recent restoration on the wings of the Ghent altarpiece, on the frames. Van Eyck already did this what I found in the test is a red ochre, and a yellow ochre, and a raw, greenish raw umber, 3 different colors of blocks, just the same as on the altarpiece of Van Eyck. only Van Eyck had put silver leaf underneath. He probably went a whole step further, which wasn't here, which has hardly oxidized under the paint and may have given a certain effect to the final result, but it's not in, it's, let's see, this is almost a century older in Bruges, this triptych. So here you see the ensemble, the wings, and the triptych, and the predella. And on the predella, when it came to me, a previous restorer had made this cleaning test. And that was very interesting. I just capitalized on it. And also Dolf van Aspelen de Boer, one of the first scientists that got in the 1970s into the scientific research of artworks. He made over 100 samples, like the earlier one I showed you of the Master of Alkmaar. I made that, but he made another 100 samples that are still with the RKD in The Hague, the enormous resource for art. So I borrowed those. They lent them to me, and I re-photographed all these samples and re-examined. It's very good samples, but now with the digital microscope. And this is one of those samples that very clearly show red and green with a varnish between the red and the green. And then like an asphalt layer, black paint. This was taken from, when you look at the bottom where the blue arrow is, there is a bishop, and I think it's St. Martin. And the sample is taken from the edge of the frame right underneath his red coat, red cape, from the frame. And what happened here? He was painted, the panel with him on it, the predella, was painted by the painter in the frame, primed and all. And then the frame received a green paint. So this is just where it overlaps, where the frame paint overlaps the cape of the bishop, the red cape, and the black paint is 18th or 19th century. It is not original. So these are not X-rays, but using X-ray for elemental analysis, X-ray fluorescence, actually macro X-ray fluorescence, because it stitches all the thousands of points together to an image. And these are the maps or the images for copper on the left and lead on the right. And this is very interesting. If you look on the right, you go up the curve, the inside curve, you see the brush strokes of marbleizing. And if you look on the left, you see the corresponding brushes in white. So it was probably painted wet and wet, the marble imitation, because I was trained as an artist, since formal training 5 years at the State Academy of Fine Arts in the Netherlands as a painter, printmaker, and sculptor. And I've done a fair amount of marbleizing in my younger years to finance my existence. And you do that wet and wet. And so you have the green copper-based paint and the white lead-based paint, and it's amazing. And it corresponds to this sample. This is from another, no, this is, let's see. I don't exactly know how this overlays with the other, but you see the brush strokes very clearly. They are more clearly even because it's not shadows in breaking light, but it's the last residues of the black paint. So I still have to find the graphic program and the skills to do this. And this I did several years ago on the iPad, just with my stylus. And it's not the right color, the right tone, but it gives you an idea of what this would have looked like. And I also indicated the gilded finials on the top, which would have been much, much bigger before most of them broke off. What a revealing thing. And then back to this same slide we saw before. So the color surviving on the pillar in the Leiden church, that green would be somewhat what the frame would be like if it hadn't been abraded and needed overpaint and all that. So we leave the Middle Ages and we're getting a little close to the end because I see I've taken a lot of time. On the left and the right, you see partial gilding, and on the right, polychromy on a frame that has not been touched because the painting wasn't important enough, but it sits patiently in the vaults of the Rijksmuseum. But keeping that in mind, there is this wonderful original frame to Frans Post, the painter that spent time in Brazil and most likely designed this frame that was carved and stripped, very thoroughly stripped. It's a kind of frame that is from the 1660s, which matches these paintings, the portrait of William III of England and Holland in this neoclassicist laurel carved frame, and the allegorical painting from 1700 with a similar frame with ribbons. They have in common, this frame by Frans Post has the laurel base in common. It's all carved, but superimposed in the carving are these fruits and other foliage, canthus leaves, snakes, scorpions, what have you. So this is one of the frames side by side with a very unappealing overgilding with toning. But was this gilded? I don't think so. And together with some colleagues from Germany that are botanists and published on the paintings of Frans Post and the animals and the foliage on these paintings. Together with them, I made this reconstruction with the technical help of Robert Eertman, the computer wizard and research scientist at the Rijksmuseum. So we sat in front of the screen, painting this in with the mouse, the computer mouse. One more to get out of it. This is the last item. This is the city of Utrecht. And it is a map, a painted map that is about 4 to 5 feet tall in its original frame. It never changed hands. It never has been overpainted or anything. It's a big painting, sits in their storage. It's wonderful. Fun things are not so popular for us and have not changed hands at all. It's a very interesting frame in many ways. It has you see the painted finish on it. It's very thin on the left. See the dowel sticking through, and actually, I hope I can enlarge this for you. Somebody screwed a hanging system right through it, And then here's a dowels of the frame construction. And let me know, am I actually enlarging this for you in front of your eyes? Did that work? Okay, that's a new thing. I have a touch screen and I can just, whoops, to go back to this. You can just put your finger and your thumb on it. So something else is very interesting, and that is more what my PhD study focuses on. The finishes are more the cherry on the cake, cherries on the cake. But the bottom member has a slanted, still in 1541, it still has a slanted bottom rail, like a ring sill. But the sides of this frame are pure Renaissance, the Cassetta model, but the northern version of it. That is coming up since the 1520s. But all the time from the 1520s to the iconoclasm periods of the 1560s, there are hybrid forms between Renaissance profiles and Gothic profiles, including even for Altarpieces, the persistent Gothic site openings that we saw in the Engelbrecht's piece. And that closes my presentation today. I hope you have all hung on to this.
Well, Hubert Baya, thank you so much. What a perfect way to end the conference. Thank you very, very much. So Julia will come on screen now and we'll just wrap up a few final thoughts about the conference.
I want to thank you too so much. We're working together with you since 2 years, and you put this together and you saw it through. Thank you. I've enjoyed every lecture.
Thank you. It was a really wonderful 2 days, and thank you to everyone who for bearing with us through this long process of getting this conference started and changed and started again. So we really, really appreciate you sticking with it with us as well and contributing so much.
We'd like to thank the moderators, who were Michael Gregory, Lisa Königsberg, and Tracy Gill. Our keynotes starting and closing the conference, Lynn Roberts and Hubert Baya. Our colleague Fraser Wright, who you haven't seen on screen, but has been present throughout the conference, managing the technology and making sure that everything goes smoothly, has been just essential to this. And so we thank you very much, Fraser. And yeah, to the wonderful group of speakers and to an audience that has been engaged with wonderful and interesting questions. This has been an absolute pleasure. A reminder that the conference has been recorded. I can't offer a firm timeline about when the talks will be posted online because it will require some post-production afterward in terms of editing and making this material available. But it is something to look forward to, and we'll hold on to the registrants' email addresses and give you an email when the talks are live online so that you can access them again.
And we'll also send a document with the abstracts for all the talks and the speakers' bios to everyone who attended next week.
Yeah, so thanks very much, everyone, and wishing you all very well. Take good care.
Thank you.